Madam President, many people think that Congress is irrelevant, unimportant, and wastes its time with floor speeches that go nowhere. Yesterday on the floor of the United States Senate, something historic occurred. Standing right back here, the senior senator from California, Senator Dianne Feinstein, delivered to Congress and to the nation a report on the use of torture by the United States of America. Seated on this side was Senator Jay Rockefeller, who, as her predecessor and chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, initiated this investigation into the use of torture. Her speech, that lasted about an hour, was followed by Senator John McCain, who stood up and applauded her for releasing this report. It's worthy of note that what happened on this floor of the Senate yesterday was an assertion of constitutional principles that goes back to the founding of this country. It was an assertion of the three branches of government and their authority, and the authority of Congress to oversee the executive branch of government. And it got down to the most basics. Let's remember how we reached the point where this report was put together and delivered to the American people. Let me say at the outset that before I came to this job, I used to practice law and occasionally would go into a courtroom. I really waited for that moment when I could turn to a jury and say, I want to let you know that my opponent in this case destroyed evidence. And I want to let you know why my opponent destroyed evidence. Because what was in that evidence was so terrible that they would rather leave it to your speculation of how bad it was than let you actually read it. That is what started this debate that led to the report. Because you see, what happened was the Central Intelligence Agency destroyed videotapes of the interrogation of prisoners. And after it was discovered that they destroyed them, the Senate Intelligence Committee said, why did you destroy those videotapes? And they said, because Congress never asked for them. And the Intelligence Committee said, we didn't know they existed. At that point, the Central Intelligence Agency said to the Senate Intelligence Committee, we did nothing wrong. And we invite you, through your staff and members of the committee, to review the cables and emails within the Central Intelligence Agency which prove our case, prove we did nothing wrong. I think the CIA was surprised and shocked when the Senate Intelligence Committee took up their invitation. It meant, I understand, 5 years of work, reviewing some 6 million pages of information. Staffers from the Senate Intelligence Committee sat in what they called the cave, day after day after day, 2 of them, pouring through emails and cables to try to reconstruct what happened after 9/11, when the Central Intelligence Agency was interrogating prisoners. It wasn't an easy task. It was made even more difficult when we came to learn that the Central Intelligence Agency hacked into the computers of the Senate Intelligence Committee. It was a tough confrontation between 2 branches of government. And it's one that resulted, I think, in the right ending when Senator Feinstein and the Senate Intelligence Committee, following the lead of Senator Rockefeller, stepped forward and produced this report. I want to just reflect for a minute on how we reached this point. But first, let me tell you, this report concluded that the CIA repeatedly misled senior officials in the Bush and Obama White Houses about detention and interrogation programs. The report said the CIA falsely told the Justice Department that techniques like waterboarding helped to obtain life-saving information that kept our country safe. The report said the CIA detained more individuals and subjected more individuals to abusive interrogation techniques than it ever disclosed to Congress or to the President. The CIA did not disclose the use of brutal interrogation techniques that went way beyond what even the torture memo of the previous administration had authorized. It is worth noting what brought us to this point, and of course it was the tragic, horrible events of September 11th. The Bush administration, after that occurrence, unilaterally decided to set aside treaties and laws that have served us in the past. President Bush's White House counsel, then Alberto Gonzales, recommended to President Bush that the president ignore the requirements of the Geneva Conventions. The Geneva Conventions were treaties that grew out of World War II, and they established rules of warfare to protect soldiers and civilians. These treaties were ratified by the United States of America. They are and were the law of the land. Colin Powell, who was Secretary of State under President Bush, objected to Alberto Gonzales's recommendation. He argued that we could comply with the Geneva Conventions, fight terrorism, and still keep America safe. Here's what Secretary Powell said at the time about setting aside the Geneva Conventions. This will reverse over a century of U.S. policy and practice and undermine the provisions of the law of war for our own troops. It will undermine public support among critical allies, making military cooperation more difficult to maintain. Today, Secretary Powell's words seem prophetic. Unfortunately, President Bush rejected Secretary Powell's advice and instead followed Alberto Gonzales's recommendations to set aside the Geneva Conventions. Then in August of 2002, the Department of Justice issued the infamous torture memo. The memo said abuse only arises to the level of torture if it causes pain equivalent to organ failure or death. The memo also concluded the president has the authority to order the use of torture, even though that torture would be a crime under U.S. law. The Justice Department of the United States also signed off on the use of torture techniques like waterboarding. This was in August of 2002. Thanks to the Intelligence Committee report, we know now that the Justice Department's legal advice was based on false information given to them by the CIA. I have a long history with this issue. It was almost 10 years ago I stood at this very desk and read into the record a graphic description of an FBI agent's record of abuse, of interrogation that she witnessed at Guantanamo Bay. At the time, I was criticized by members of the Bush-Cheney administration, but we know now that the description by this FBI agent was accurate, and what she described was authorized by the Bush administration based on false information provided by the CIA. It was 10 years ago that I first authored legislation to ban cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment of detainees. In June of 2004, America was shocked by revelations about what had occurred at Abu Ghraib prison. The Bush administration told us these were rogue actions of a few bad players. I introduced my torture legislation in 2004. I wanted to make sure and make it clear that America condemned the abuses at Abu Ghraib and stood by our commitment to the humane treatment of prisoners. But what we didn't know is that the administration had approved the use of abusive interrogation techniques in CIA facilities and at Guantanamo Bay. A Defense Department investigation later concluded that these techniques migrated to Abu Ghraib. I offered my legislation as an amendment to the Defense Authorization Bill. I expected it to be non-controversial. It was adopted unanimously here in the Senate. However, the Bush administration had it removed in conference. In the fall of 2004, I tried again. I offered the same amendment to the 9/11 Commission intelligence reform legislation. Again, my amendment was adopted unanimously by the Senate, and again in conference negotiations, the Bush administration removed it. I didn't understand their opposition to my amendment because the United States had ratified the Torture Convention, a treaty that prohibits cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, the same thing my amendment said. It is critically important that this report has been declassified so that the American people can understand what has been done in their name. It was inconsistent with American values. It didn't make us safer, and it must never be repeated again. Yesterday, Senator McCain came to the floor to support Senator Feinstein's disclosure. And during the course of his statement on the floor, he said, "Our enemies are acting without conscience. America cannot act without conscience." We are called to a higher standard than some because we believe in basic human values, and in basic principles. And it may mean that some of the tactics used by our worst enemies are out of bounds for us, as they should be. What happened with this disclosure is an important reaffirmation of our separation of powers and our constitutional responsibility. I want to congratulate Senator Feinstein, Senator Rockefeller, every member of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, but particularly those who voted to go forward time and time again. They were under immense pressure not to do so. But the fact that they have held the CIA accountable to the American people, to Congress, to the President, is part of our constitutional responsibility. It reminds people that in a democracy, the people govern, and the people have a right to know what this government is doing in their name. There's been a lot of debate since the release of this report, and I assume it will continue. But if it ends with the report and the press, we haven't done enough. We have to reform our processes. And let me start with Congress. I served on the Senate Intelligence Committee for 4 years. It was a daunting assignment. Virtually every hearing is behind closed doors and classified. No one knows you're even at the Select Committee on Intelligence unless you tell them afterwards. Testimony before us isn't available to the public. And most of the time, the professionals from these intelligence agencies come before us and speak in the acronyms of their agencies to the point where you can't even follow what they're saying. It took me 2 years of sitting there puzzling over what they were saying to finally get an insight into what the committee and its responsibility were all about. That's not right. We need to make sure that congressional oversight of our intelligence function is up to the job and up to the Constitution. That means more resources put in the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. When I served, members of the committee shared a staffer. We each shared a staffer. We didn't even have one staff person working for each of us on these subjects. The amount of money that's being spent, tens of millions of dollars in covert activities and the like, needs to be carefully monitored. And as the chairman of the Select Committee on, the Subcommittee on Defense Appropriations, I have that responsibility to look at the overall budget on intelligence. There is not enough oversight. We need to make certain that our branch of government is up to that challenge so that we can guarantee the American people that we're doing our job so that we can be held accountable as we hold the agencies, the intelligence agencies, accountable as well. I think what happened yesterday is going to be part of the history of the Senate, an important, positive part. And I hope that it's just the beginning where both political parties come together and accept their constitutional responsibility.